lovely day begins. Ghosts and ghouls with greenish skin. So close your eyes and you will find that you've arrived in Frightenstein. Perhaps the Count will find a way to make his monster work today. For if he solves this monster mania, he can return to Transylvania. So welcome where the sun won't shine, to the castle of Count Frightenstein.
How you guys doing? And welcome to Between Two Worlds Radio. I'm your host, Derrick Whiteskycloud, and yes, we are here. I got my good friend Jonny Enoch tonight with me in the chat room. We're going to be talking about the ghoulish, I guess we'll say the ghoulish history of Halloween and the history of it too. I've been wanting to talk about this for such a long time, and every year I love to celebrate Halloween in my own special way, because when I was a kid, I grew up Halloween, I guess to say when I was just a little boy, and my mother and my father used to take these, well, we didn't have paper bags, we didn't have these other types of plastic containers you do find in the grocery store back then today. But we had actually, our parents used pillowcases to make sure us kids really got the candy. And and we used to go home, we used to go up and down the neighborhoods like crazy. I mean, the neighbors were giving us candies galore. This is back in the 1960s, so this is going way back for me. But I remember when I was a kid, and I would say 1960-ish, late 60s, mid-late 60s. And this is in Brandon, Manitoba. I was in Brandon at the time. And my parents, took my sister and I around. We were doing our Halloween, treats. Nobody would actually say trick. Well, I'm not sure if anybody did say trick or treat back then, but we'd said Halloween, Happy Halloween, or trick or treat. I think it was trick or treat. But when we went out there, we had candies galore. I mean, varieties of them, even home cooked or home baked. I guess say those candy popcorns, or there's, the caramel popcorns, and they're all nicely wrapped up. We got apples, we got all kinds of cool things. But there's a bit of a cautionary part to that as well. And that part was because our parents were warned that we cannot eat the apples until the parents checked it out first, because back in those years, even the word pins were put inside of them, razor blades were put inside of them. This is back in the 60s. Who would actually want to hurt a kid? Well, it did. Apparently, the rumor was out back in the 1960s, so it's something that most people say, oh, well, it's something new. It existed back then when I was a kid. So we had that, parents put that fear in us, thinking, don't eat the apple. You gotta wait till you get home and they'll cut it open. We were fortunate. We never did find any pins or razor blades. But someone was stupid enough, many years later, I would say 30, 40 years later, decided to put pins and razor blades in them. So, you learn by what people create a rumor. And so this is how rumors start, right? So we have so many scary things that happen throughout our lives. And, people celebrate Halloween through dressing up. I can tell Johnny right now, my biggest fascination when I was a kid growing up, two type of characters. One, I was wanting to be an executioner, cutting off heads. And I did it. I actually dressed up as an executioner back in the 1970s. I actually made my own hood, made my own axe, the whole 9 yards. Earlier years than that, when I was 19 years of age, I was so fascinated by Lon Chaney, I decided to make myself look like a wolfman. Not werewolf, but wolfman. And I looked pretty decent for being 19. And I, typically I put rubber glue on my face, just to put the hair on. And we actually used real human hair. I went down to the barber shop and collected all kinds of hair. So I had other people's hair on my face. Go figure, right? So, crazy kid me. I didn't have enough hair on my head, so to speak, to finish off my face. So I had to find some darkish mixed kind of hair. And I used to learn from watching people. I went to an event, and I was watching people layer hairs or types of things on their faces, and that's how I learned how to create my own furry face. And it worked out pretty good, back of my hands and everything. And so I had fun doing it, growing, and even to this day. So my wife and I, just a week ago, went to go shopping to Home Depot. And I saw these cool-looking mechanical wolf masks, where the jaw opens up. You know, it's kind of cheaply looking, but it was kind of cool. And I grabbed it, put it on, did a few pictures, and that's where my banner, my flyer, is actually on my page on Facebook. And you can see it. That's me. I'm the one that put it on, and my wife took the pictures, so I had fun doing it. So, you know, we had fun doing it. And there are so many people out there today have so many warnings of kids being harmed, you know, through Halloween. There's always going to be the odd person who's going to do some scaring of children coming to the door, or even, I'm not sure if it gets worse than that. But without no further ado, I want to bring my good friend Jonny Enoch on, because we got so much history to talk about regarding the history of Halloween, and it comes through different aspects of different cultures as well. So, without no further ado, Mr. Jonny Enoch.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, Derrick. And I heard you talking about Cheney. Now, I thought at first maybe you were talking about Dick Cheney, and I thought, now that is really scary. You don't want to be out in the woods with him.
No, Lon Chaney is him. That's the guy that's the guy who I was working with.
Yeah, both have their Halloween aspects, but no, I think it's exciting. What a great idea for a show. Halloween is a magical time of the year. We know that it's a time of the year when the days are getting darker. The ancients were fascinated with this time of the year, especially as we move into what we know as All Souls Night, or Samhain, that they called it back in the times of the ancient Celtic peoples, coming from the Druidic traditions. But Derrick, I got to ask you, have you got any Halloween decorations up other than going through Home Depot? Have you put any jack-o'-lanterns or anything up?
Well, no, but, you know, speaking of jack-o'-lanterns, I actually heard a cute joke from a kid yesterday, so I put it on my page. How do you fix a jack-o'-lantern?
How?
Pumpkin patch. Gotta have fun with that.
I guess that's how you could... there's so many pumpkin puns you could make from that. But, I mean, I think the pumpkins are fantastic. I'm a big fan of the pumpkin spice lattes and all the pumpkin pies. I ate one too many pumpkin pies this year, Derrick. I'll tell you, they're just so delicious. I remember eating one with you this year, right around your birthday. It was incredible. You should tweet it or post a picture of you blowing out the candles on that pumpkin pie.
Actually, it's on my Facebook page. It is on there. Yeah. I actually...
That's it.
Your lovely wife brought the pumpkin pie out to me, and I blew the pumpkin pie.
Yeah. You blew it.
I blew it.
Oh, man. But yeah, that's the thing. But people make jack-o'-lanterns this time of the year. But then you ask, where does that come from? Well, it's amazing to me, when I've been out in Ireland, going out to all the different places of the areas of the Republic of Ireland or Southern Ireland, people still take the idea of fairies very seriously. There's an idea of fairy lore. We talk about what they call the trooping fairies. And the trooping fairies are believed to come out on that night because I guess you could say, Derrick, we're at a very unique time, as you know, where the stuff we used to consider the subject of quacks and charlatans, talking about dimensions and time, space, and all these areas, the sci-fi stuff, that's now what's being taught in our universities. That's what we're discussing in theoretical physics. Yeah. So when we get this idea of Halloween, October 31st, that there is an area, what we call a tween time. So to the Irish, they always believe you could see spirits and you could have strange things happen to you if you were in a tween place. A tween place would be, let's say, in the middle of a bridge, because it's neither up nor down. Or if you're looking between two branches, it forms like a glitch in the matrix where you're looking into a tween place where there's all these areas. Well, a tween time could be in the middle of the seasons. A tween time could be also from dusk till dawn, where there's this threshold where we can see in there. And I know our indigenous cultures are very similar over here on these sort of beliefs and tapping into the secrets of nature, because these are the very secrets of nature that have been here for thousands of years. But it's no secret that there's inhabitants of these worlds, nature spirits and fairies and entities. Well, this belief that they had at this time of the year going out into October 31st was and onwards into November, that we would start to find an arrangement of time space. So time space would be arranged differently so that the veils would be thinner, so that those spirits who we have lost in the past, of loved ones and other entities and forms and fairies, could come into our world a lot easier. So what that might look like is we might light a candle to invite them in for dinner. We might, make a type of a spiritual communication or a seance, which I know you're very well versed with. But otherwise, people would carve these jack-o'-lanterns originally out of turnips, and then they'd start carving them out of pumpkins to scare away the bad spirits that they were worried would show up.
You know, one thing I find is funny is that when you talk about turnips that were used in Halloween, more than pumpkins at the time, because wasn't it England that actually started all this? Was it the UK that started all that rage of the turnip, and then who started the pumpkins?
Well, we go back into Ireland and the Celtic countries for these traditions, but I mean, it spread throughout that, definitely over to England and everything, because, the Romans, when the Romans came into these Celtic places, into the Celtic countries, later on, we even saw popes try to take over a lot of pagan traditions. And when people hear the word pagan, they think it's bad, but it really isn't. The old definition of pagan comes from the pagani. The pagani were the country folk, just the nature folk. So these ideas of looking at the solstices and the energy points of the earth were very natural. So, for example, at Christmas time, we would like to say that this celebration is also about the solstice, where the sun is coming back into the northern hemisphere. It dies at one point. We go back where it returns to a point on the 22nd, the 23rd, the 24th, and then it is reborn again. So it dies, it goes away for about 3 days, and then comes back. And it's very interesting that there's places around the earth, for example, in Karnak in Egypt and Newgrange in Ireland, where there's a solstice alignment. We even find solstice alignments over at Chichen Itza and the Yucatan of Mexico, where the light comes down into a very particular arrangement. For thousands of years, they've had these arrangements, and it lines up because these people knew that there was energy they could tap into. So if the energies around Christmas are very important, for example, Derrick, if the energies of Christmas tell us that the angels of Capricorn have returned around the earth to spread warmth and love and kindness and compassion that we tend to feel in these traditions. Rudolf Steiner would remind us that he would say, when we come to the time of winter or Christmas, we all kind of act like nature does. So there's snow on the ground, and we would draw into ourselves like nature does, and we find that kindness and that love and that appreciation. Well, the same is for this season. It's a very magical time. The winds of change have blown once more. The leaves are blowing away. The old is being refreshed. We are moving into a new type of an energy. So I think what a fascinating time. Like you mentioned, you brought in England into this picture, that we all feel it. There's something magical in the air. We know it's there.
I'm going to share a couple little pieces here from our Facebook chat room people. One, her name is Vivian. She says, my ex said when he was a kid, there was a nasty old guy who used to heat pennies on his stove, throw them on the ground on Halloween, and laugh when the kids burnt their hands picking up the pennies. Absolutely disgusting.
Terrible.
Yeah. Second one, she says, Dolores. She says, for years, I drove my grandkids around in a hearse to go trick-or-treating. We scare them instead of them scaring us. you pull up in a hearse and the street gets empty very fast. Apparently some of the people actually run right back into their house. They don't want to come out when there's a hearse. That's pretty good.
You see, that's the thing. People associate this holiday with death and rebirth. And the interesting part about that, and this ties into our trick-or-treating, is that when the Catholic Church took over Halloween, just like the Catholic Church, most of the Catholic saints that you find, like Saint Bridget, that was a pagan goddess that was made into a Catholic saint. So they took this day, this All Hallows Day, this sacred time of connecting with these energies, and they called it All Souls Day or All Saints Day. And then they started to make these All Souls cakes and offerings up for the spirits. And then later that turned into trick-or-treating as it came over to America. We saw transformation of these holidays around the 1800s, and then started to become more popular in the communities in the 1920s and into the 1950s. But I mean, this cruelty at Halloween, this trick aspect that you just mentioned with the pennies. I mean, that's sad. I guess there's a Grinch in every holiday.
There's a big Grinch. Yeah, there's going to be people out there, I'm sure, that's going to try to screw it up for the kids. But we'll always have people that try to. It's just like I said, my mom and my dad always back in the 60s, they were very cautious to make sure that us kids are well taken care of, protected. I've been noticing there are very few kids now trick-or-treating like they used to. They're actually now, and also in some of the schools, they're making it not illegal, but they're forbidding kids dressing up in costumes for Halloween under a religious belief in all the schools now. So the kids cannot and are not allowed to dress up in schools for Halloween. Why do you think now, folks, and Johnny, do you think that's right on their part? Should the school stop the kids from celebrating Halloween and dressing up for it? Or do you think that they feel that they want to respect every religion? There's only one specific religion that doesn't agree with dressing up for Halloween. Well, actually two. One is I've been hearing about people that are non-believers of God. I couldn't care less. Or there's a certain religion now that saying they feel that we have no right, or our kids have no right to dress up. If they can't do it, why should they? So what do you think, Johnny?
Well, Derrick, I'm not a big fan of the political correction culture. You and I have discussed that before, but I also understand that it's not just costumes. We're seeing this right across the board. And what the greater picture about this is that we're all going through growing pains right now. The world is changing. It's transforming. It's not the place it was 10, even 20 years ago or onwards. I mean, if you look at the transition that we had in the world from even the 70s into the 80s, it wasn't that dramatic. I mean, there was the introduction of DeLoreans and Michael Jackson and MTV and all those sort of things. Yeah. But, I mean, it wasn't as dramatic as now. What we have is we have the product of globalization, and we also have the product of technology and the internet. So what's happening now is that now we're becoming a global village, and people are becoming very uncomfortable with some of the stuff. But again, it's all growing pains. I think we will get through it eventually. But if you look back in history, anytime that you've seen a place that was very liberal, like Alexandria in Egypt, or you go back into what happened to the ancient Persian Empire, when they started to bring all the cultures and religions and practices together, at first people were getting very antsy and very uncomfortable. So it's hard to say how we will transition out of this, but right now we live in an environment where I think we're getting all the stuff out that we have to get out, and then maybe it will ease up after everybody's comfortable. But at first, well, everybody's congregating together, people don't want to get too pissed off, so they say, don't you offend me over here, don't you offend me over here. But what do you think? Is there a fine line between respecting people and offending people, and can we do that in a way that's good for everybody?
Well, my thinking, I mean, I feel that I have every right to dress up to whom I want to be. Not disrespecting someone's religion, or like not dressing up, say, from a person from another country, or in my culture, a lot of people are actually dealing with appropriation. But I mean, I got guys now talking about they're talking about environmental safety or want to take care of the world. So one guy says, I want to dress up as a garbage can. Like, why? Groucho.
Derrick, we have politicians in Canada, though.
Oh, yeah,
we have politicians in Canada running the country that dress up all the time in whatever they want. I mean, they put makeup on, they wear religious outfits.
Yeah, blackface. Yeah, I've seen that.
Our prime minister went to India and put a turban on and dressed up. So I mean, it doesn't get any more.
Well, I mean, mind you, they do teach you how to put on a turban and so I don't think the idea that he put the turban on. I think they put on him, and so I think he was trying to. I think he was just trying to be respectful and follow, how they lived, or how they lived.
I've been to countries before where they put turbans on me. When I was in Egypt, we go into a Galabaya party, which they always have on every time you're in Egypt. It's very comfortable. Men over there, what they wear is you wear a Galabaya, and a Galabaya is like a muumuu for men, and it's very comfortable. So I was wearing a Galabaya out in Egypt, and it's very liberating, and it's sort of worn like a long version of the kilt, but then. They said you have to wear the headpiece with it, so they started wrapping that around me, and the guy at the tailor shop said you needed to go with it. So yeah, people wear it.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it is. We always, for some reason, I understand what the world is like right now. Everybody wants to be correct in certain things, but I think we forgot how to have fun. And I would say really what Halloween's done now is turn itself into an adult party time for adults. It's not as much for kids as they used to be, but a lot of kids the parents still try to get the kids to go out and enjoy their Halloween. And also Halloween and fireworks. When I was a kid, we never had fireworks. But when fireworks suddenly has come out now too, so yeah, there's a few things have changed up a little bit, but yet history has changed itself, I'm sure. In some of our, we talk about some of the Halloween themes, yet there's always, anytime that Halloween's about to come around, and why is October 31st a specific date? Why couldn't they have like November the 1st, or how come they have October 30th? Why that day, do you think?
Well, again, it's the changing of the seasons. The days are getting darker. There's a movement there with Samhain or Samhain Halloween that goes into that end of that October-November period where it's that shifting for the darkness. And within that, when we move out of that into that period of the year, it's clearly an indicator that these magical energies are present for those that are looking at it. But otherwise, I think that we have all kinds of different celebrations that are based on these changes. Like when we go over, like we were talking about with Christmas, look at that. There's a holiday there, or you go over to Easter. It's all the movements of the sun. So all of these times are all shifted with solar energy, with all shifts of the seasons on Earth. And that would be why. But it's just this particular time of the year, it causes people to put glue on their faces and dress like Wolfman.
Yeah, me. How about, here's something else. I mean, people like to celebrate Halloween, and we got a witch. A lot of women like to come out as witches. Okay, and they play the role as witches, and they'll dress up for that. How does that relate to Halloween, do you think?
Well, what we see, the traditional witch, when we see them, the costume and whatnot, where witchcraft really comes from is it's quite ancient. It's what we see today is what we call Wicca, is quite watered down. So Wicca is sort of neo or new paganism. So the cone hat that the witches wear that we see portrayed, that can go back even into the ancient Aryan world. It was used for solar cycles, like you'd see with the dunce cap and everything else. But when we see the witch, the traditions that they got were mostly out of the British Isles that were trickled down, and then we have other principles of drawing a circle and calling on the elements and the energies. But the broom that the witch has, that we see them flying around with, what the broom was used for, Derrick, was actually for fertility rituals. it was used for sexual reasons. And what they would do is that they would use it to stimulate an orgasm while they were jumping around in a field to bring around the fertility of crops. And they would also use it with a hallucinogenic ointment.
Okay, so there's no guys there to do this or what to help them. They're just this. Okay, this is kind of weird.
No, that's what the broom was for. And the truth is that there was all kinds of rituals that were related to these kind of things. Maybe
that's the reason why a lot of women like to. No, they won't. I was gonna go there, but I'm not. But
flying ointment.
No, but just saying that, like, what's the purpose? I mean, I know the women would. I remember one part. I was reading a story about this many years ago. The women would chant and dance in a circle. Okay, and at the time, this is out in the forest. There's like maybe 10 of them or so, and they. I guess the men were witnessing it from a distance. I guess the men or the women didn't. And a lot of women.
I think I saw a movie about this once.
And the women were dancing naked, or supposed to be dancing naked.
I think it was the same movie.
Oh, okay.
Anyways,
they were talking about one of the girls getting very weird, and they thought that she was afflicted with a disease of some sort, and they found out later through the generation of how she was accused as being like a really bad witch or a witch, like said that she went crazy. They found out later that the wheat changed. That it's almost like it caused a change in our immune system. The way the wheat had, like normally wheat's used for the bread, to make the bread, but for some reason it changed, and when the woman ate the piece of bread, she went crazy. Do you know anything about that?
Well, it could be related to these crops, the magic and the energy that we were discussing. But, that's another thing, too, is that, they would measure crops and nature and cycles and how this would respond. Yeah. Look what we do when we're measuring crops, when we're talking about crop circles, and we're measuring the energy and the disturbances around this and radiation and whatnot. So, it could be tied into a lot of different things around that, but it's quite common when you get witches together, they form what they call a coven, and they come together in a circle. Most magic is done in a circle for the ancient forms, but it's very interesting. We do associate witches with Halloween. In fact, there's many famous places that are associated with witches and the persecution for those that practice witchcraft, not only around England, but of course in Salem. I don't know if you saw recently what they were talking about with Salem. They had reconstructed a giant Ouija board here as we enter into Halloween because of places like that were so well known.
Why?
It's witchcraft.
Why would they do that?
Well, Ouija boards are interesting too, Derek. We could get into that. There's some really interesting connections to Ouija boards here in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Oh, I've had my share of freaking Ouija boards when I was 10 years old. 2 British boys had to celebrate their birthday, and I was invited as one of the kids to the birthday party, and there was just the 4 of us. That was what was left of the birthday party, and it was twin brothers. So we were in the basement, and they brought out their birthday present, which is the Ouija board, and there was just a Jewish boy next to me and myself we're all sitting on the couch. On the couches, there's 2 of them, and there's a coffee table sitting in the center of us. And I remember the twin brothers kept saying, okay, let's play the game. And for some reason, I don't know why, my body didn't feel right. Here's a 10-year-old going like, I don't really feel right about this. I'm not sure what it is. So the response of the boy next to me said, when they pulled out the board and laid it on the table, the planchette sitting there, and the Jewish boy says, that's the devil's board. And the kids, the twin brothers are going like, no, you're crazy. And the Jewish boy says, I can prove it. So he took his Star of David that he was wearing on his necklace, and he just said out loud, if you are of God's pure light, then you won't burn. But if you're the devil's board, you will burn. And he took this Star of David, laid it on top of the board. We watched the smoke billow coming out from all 4 sides of the board. And the one brother just leaped forward and pushed the board off the table, and there's a black burn mark square underneath the board. I got up and I'm out the door. I'm gone. I ran. And I ran all the way home, and I refused to go back to that house. That's how scared I was. It's something that and my heart, my chest was pounding really hard. So I felt that I experienced a darkness that was connected to that board. And this is the problem where a lot of kids are doing today. And this is the problem that a lot of the toy stores are doing. They are manipulating children to play with the other side, that they don't know how to deal with it. When they dare a bad thing to come forward from the other side, they do harm themselves. That's why a lot of these kids come down with having manic depression or different personalities all of a sudden, because they become attacked by a dark force, because they dared it to come out. I've seen it happen. I've seen kids' eyes turn jet black, possessed. And it's something I don't like to see a child hurt that way. So anybody says that they want to play with a Ouija board, they better darn sure know how to use it properly and know how to close it properly, because if you don't, you're going to end up seeing yourself in a big, bad problem. Because
it's interesting you should say that, because I noticed one of the guys that just shared your video here of this podcast, or the radio broadcast, sorry, because it's on the air.
Yeah.
The Hank Kracher, a friend of mine from California, from Immortal Light, he just shared this, and I know his wisdom is always, when you're doing spiritual things, he says that he always puts the light of God around himself whenever taking any spiritual endeavor out there. And whether you want to call that the light of the universe, the light of the one, the light of the source, the light of the great spirit, I do believe that there is universal light. And that's what everybody has to remember, Derrick, at the end of the day, is that when you look out at the universe, we might see a lot of dark matter. We see there's this entire invisible world. But if you know the secret of the light is that you can take one little candle flame, one little light that you have, and you can burn up all the darkness.
So the thing is that a lot of people don't realize, if you treat a lot of your tools that you want to communicate from the other side, you treat them with respect, and if you know how to use them properly, you will never come to harm, and make sure that you don't put any harm around others. And yet, I've seen kids take Ouija boards to a graveyard during Halloween and dare someone from the other side to come out. Guess who has to fix it?
You do. Well, here's the thing that's interesting about that, Derrick, is that a lot of people before would dismiss Ouija boards and say it's just a lot of nonsense. But the Ouija board is actually based on an old concept. So what's really fascinating about that is that the name Ouija, for example, comes from the oui, from the French for yes, and the ja from the German for yes, like ja, so two yeses. And so we go back into William Fuld. We see it introduced as a board game or a parlor game in the 1800s. But we can go back into the Song Dynasty, where they were doing automatic writing in China. We can see the planchette being used. One of the ladies who was very famous at being involved with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, her name was Ellen G. White. She had all kinds of strange stories about lifting rocks over her head. All of the teachings from the Seventh-day Adventists came out of automatic writing. So it's interesting, we get this concept of the planchette and the letters coming together from that. But people have often been using these, and it's been a part of the spiritualist movement, as you know. But Vancouver, British Columbia, made some serious news back in 2012 when UBC, the university here, as you know, they started a study up on Ouija boards. But they didn't do the study just on a paranormal sake. They did the study on implicit cognition. So what they were studying is that the conscious and the subconscious mind, how much information it could retain, how it could, recall this information. Let's say you walk into a room. Law enforcement is always trying to teach people in the intelligence agencies, and in their training, you hear them talking about this, that if they walk out, let's say, into a parking lot, the average person would walk out into a parking lot and they would notice just one or two details. But if you train your mind, if let's say you're in special access training, what you would do is that you train your mind to see everything. What cars are there? How many people are there? What color their hair is? How did they tie their shoes? License plates. They just automatically know it. Now, what we do know is that actually in these studies that they've shown, even for aircraft engineers, is that when you walk into a parking lot, even if you don't remember something when someone asks you, you actually can recall all those details, let's say in hypnosis. So you do retain it. It's just the ability to train yourself to recall it. Anyhow, going forward, they found out in their Ouija board study is that people that did not have Ouija boards in their hands during these studies, that those people could recall something like 50% of the answers right. If they asked a question that the person probably didn't know, they could do 50%. But if they had a Ouija board in their hand, they could get 65% and higher of the questions right. And they measured this to using little electronic sensors and everything else, and they did an amazing study. They found out that Ouija boards operate through something known as the ideomotor effect. And this ideomotor effect uses your autonomic nervous system to move ever so slightly to get the results of the Ouija board. So what does that tell us? The occult has always told us, Derrick, the esoteric teachings have always told us that the subtle realms of spirit communicate through the subconscious mind. They communicate through us that way. So if a person is working with an entity or one of these astral life forms, there's lots of astral wildlife out there, just like there's coyotes in the forest. There's astral wildlife people encounter when they're astral projecting. Sometimes they linger in houses. Sometimes they've been over here for a long time. They're going to be drawn. They're going to be attracted to various activities.
I want to thank more of our folks coming into the chat room tonight. And one of our chat room followers is Tobias, and she says that we were never allowed these boards in our house. My mother is Wiccan, so we had fair warning from her. And Marty, who also said, when I was about 7, I got an old wooden Ouija board given to me from my grandma after she had passed around at the age of 77. The first thing I did, I played with it, and was destroyed, and I guess destroyed it. Probably because it sounds to me that he experienced it in a very, very negative way or scary way. So he played with it once. Well, yeah, these things can happen, folks. Others will say evil spirits love to grab a hurting child spirit at the time like that. Good choice. Yeah, you know what? What happens, folks? I've had a boy that was actually he was wheelchair bound. How to say? He couldn't do things for himself specifically. He couldn't walk, but he was in a wheelchair. He was only 11 years old. His mom was a medium. And I guess he wanted to be like his mom. And so he started playing with the Ouija board, and he had his own little version of tarot deck. And he was so excited, he wanted to give me a reading. He said, Derrick, can I give you a reading? I said, sure. When he gave me a reading, the reading wasn't from him because his voice changed and went to a deep grottal sound. He became possessed. It came out and it said to me that I had to go kill someone, and they named the person who I was supposed to kill, and if I didn't kill that person, that I would die soon. And I told the boy, when I looked at him, and I said, he's an innocent one. Get out of him and leave him alone. This is a kid in a wheelchair that, he wanted to be like his mom, and yet there's always going to be some dark thing, some dark spirit entity is going to try and control or try to get to me through a child, and that's not fair. So the thing is that I always tell people, if you're going to play with this sort of thing, and even whether it's during Halloween or even after Halloween, it is something that you need to teach the kids how to respect it. And I'll tell you why. Back in 1973, they passed a law in England. It is illegal to sell Ouija boards to children and by any means of any store. That means that they already know. Why would England pass a law? Because England is considered as the highest spiritual, ghostly, I guess you'd say, country in the world, because it's an island of its own. And so there have been so many generational wars, violence, you name it, and so many ghostly people still linger on the land and they're surrounded by water, just like BC. British Columbia here is surrounded by water, a lot of water. So that's why you'll see more appearances of ghosts out here, or more activity of extraterrestrials. And I'll say that too, because even on Halloween, people are actually noticing alien visitation, Johnny.
Yes, they do.
I wonder why. Are they looking? Are the aliens looking for the us dressing up to want to be like them, or why are they so attracted to Halloween as well? I wonder.
Maybe it's just that the energy is at a great time for contact. I mean, let's not forget that Aleister Crowley, who we can also link back to Vancouver, by the way, we can get into that and how there's a Halloween connection there. But Aleister Crowley, he had made contact with a being known as LAM, L-A-M, when he was using these spiritual contact protocols, and that being looked very much like a gray extraterrestrial if people look him up. But I mean, this is the interesting part about that. Again, in Vancouver, with the Aleister Crowley connection, Derrick, there is a publication out here which you are always mentioned in there, which is the New Agora.
Yeah.
And I want to give a shout out to Lorenzo. You can get this on the web, newagora.ca, and it's a printed publication. I have a new article coming out, by the way, everyone. It's going to be out at the very beginning of November. You can get a preview of the article right now. If you go to the website, you click on preview. It's up there right now. And Derrick is mentioned in the article, by the way, so definitely check that out. But I mentioned the occult secrets of Vancouver and Victoria, and I mentioned exactly what you're saying, Derrick, that the island there that Vancouver Island is on, according to the historians, such as John Adams, who does these incredibly fabulous things called the ghostly walks out in Victoria. You don't want to miss that. If you go there, you absolutely have to check out the ghostly walks. But he said to me that the ghost activity, the spirit activity there is not only due to the history of the place. Here's a place that had brothels and opium dens, the Hudson Bay Company. There was First Nations cemeteries that were uprooted and built alongside with Fort Victoria, and they had Bastion Square doing these hangings. They had a Masonic architect that built the Parliament buildings, and then he was murdered by his wife's estranged lover. All kinds of fascinating stuff, but it's a city loaded with secret societies and strange activity when it relates to the occult. Some researchers have said Victoria, BC, Canada has the second highest population in the world of practicing witches and Satanists, next to Geneva, Switzerland. And I don't know if you've ever seen the book, Derrick. Have you seen the book that came out in 1980? It was called Michelle Remembers. Have you ever seen that?
I think so. I think I did. Yeah.
There was a famous psychologist that put this book out. His name was Dr. Lawrence Padzner, and everyone can look this up. There was a lady named Michelle, and she claimed that she was involved with high-level occult ritualistic behavior by high members of society, and they took her to many famous landmarks in Victoria, including the Ross Bay Cemetery, where she was buried alive in the mausoleum and used to evoke a demonic entity. And some people dismissed her claims years later because Dr. Lawrence Padzner, who later on became her husband, he was using clinical hypnotherapy with her and recalling her memories. And they said, well, it was in the 80s, a time of satanic hysteria with television evangelists. Others have disputed it and said they think that there's absolutely something to the book. But it does have a lot of incredible sights to see like that. But in Vancouver here, speaking of Halloween, Derrick, which I mentioned in the article, is that Aleister Crowley, the infamous Aleister Crowley, had visited Vancouver, and he had his student there living in North Vancouver by Lonsdale. And the student was Charles Stansfield Jones. And I learned all about this, by the way, from Chris Bennett. I went and interviewed him for the article. He's not only a cannabis historian and a scholar out here in Vancouver. He wrote a great new book out. It's called Liber 420. Everybody check it out, please. It's got lots of great stuff. He links all the stuff with spiritism and seances and elixirs that had cannabis and hashish and nightshades that were used by the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Royal Society. They were doing these kind of rituals. Well, Aleister Crowley travels back in this time period over to Vancouver, and his apprentice, who was living in North Vancouver, Charles Stansfield Jones, gets high on all the peyote that Crowley had brought in for his OTO group down here in Vancouver. This guy is arrested naked down in Victory Square by Hastings Street in Vancouver in 1923. He's circumnavigating the entire city, chanting, doing a ritual to open up a portal to draw entities into the center of Vancouver. And Crowley's hanging out with these guys, and people wonder why Vancouver has such strange energy. He was also visited by Helena Blavatsky and many others.
So we want to blame Crowley for running around naked and getting everybody all worked up, and
well, I think drugs have a lot to do with it down there these days. But I mean, I don't know why the other people are running around naked in the middle of traffic.
Yeah, the difference between Crowley and the opioid system is a little different. But yeah, there's chanting in there. But you know, it makes a lot of sense because there's one of the restaurants that's actually, I'm sure a lot of you folks may know the name of the old spaghetti factory. They did an investigation. I did a paranormal investigation. How that worked out was that the Vancouver Film School heard about my work as a medium, wanted to interview me, but they wanted to have me on location to investigate paranormal activity. Now, you can actually go on YouTube and have a look. Basically, I'm on there. You can type in the word Old Spaghetti Factory, Derrick Whiteskycloud, and you'll see the part of the investigation. They did the documentary about me, but the interesting part about this is when I was there, they brought a Vancouver historian, someone who knows all the history of all the places, locations that's been there for years. So what happened was when I was in the building and further back, behind the restaurant, or in the restaurant there in the further back area, that's where it has most of the activity, major paranormal activity. But one part that I discreetly had to focus on, I don't know why, but I kept seeing this one particular position of a table in the back, and I can actually visualize or remote view a time period back in the 1930s where these men are playing poker and there's money on the table. And I see someone walk up behind these guys that are playing cards. One walked up behind the guy and shot him in the back of the head. And then I heard out loud, Al Capone called for the hit to kill him. So I said, out loud, I looked at the guy who's a historian, I said, Al Capone worked out of here. And he actually had rum running in here. I could see rum. I could see it actually hidden in caskets. And the guy looked at me and he said, "You're the first out of all the people who have been in there as far as mediums or paranormal, had no one ever actually mentioned ever about this guy." And he says, "You were exactly right, because Al Capone was secretly hiding in Vancouver and no one was supposed to know that he was there. And the only people that knew were some of the corrupt police and the gang that he was with." So wow. how would I know? Okay, so apparently there was an underground walkway where they were sneaking in the rum. Now apparently, what he told me after, they closed that off. That tunnel down below now is closed off. They cemented that wall. It now became a parking lot. But further down below the parking lot is still that tunnel. There's tunnels all across Vancouver, because there is secret societies under the ground in Vancouver.
I can believe it. Well, you know, Derrick, they're in, as you pointed out many times, they've been in Winnipeg, Manitoba, right under the legislative buildings, subterranean chambers there. Yep. They're in all the esoteric Masonic symbolism, as well as the legislative buildings over in Victoria, all over the place. We're a country, as we've been built up on these countries, we've been built up by secret societies that gave us our law, that gave us our systems that we have here. But it's a different world now, because a lot of these places that were formerly accessed, now they have kind of been decommissioned or gone away, but we find the remnants, such as in Victoria.
Do you think that our Halloween, the energy of Halloween, October 31st, is at its strongest, where people are deciding to call out the ghosts and call out the ghouls and call out everything? Do you think that's even there? Are there more witches out there practicing their work or their skills that evening, which is more than average? What do you think?
I definitely think so, Derrick. This has been the way. That's been the way of life for a long time, and there's many people that take that time period, those couple of days, for those type of energies and rituals and activities. They take it very seriously, and they have for a long time on this planet. And you might find, if you go to places like Stonehenge and other areas in southern France and places around the world, that you'll find ritualistic activities and groups getting together, or up in the Hollywood Hills at the Bronson Caves, strange activities. People know there's magical places, that they have a gathering, that something has to go on. Let's put it this way, is that even in our traditional ceremonial magic in the occult, that if you were to do some kind of a magic ritual, everything is taken into account, not only in the human body, but in time-space. So, for example, you see on our hand, if you see the hand, you might have different coordinates for your hand. So you might have over here a finger with Venus, or you might have Jupiter. That's why you're a pointer finger or something. You might give someone a Saturn finger. There's a green extraterrestrial head. You might have an Apollo finger for ring finger, or you might have Mercury. So if you've ever given someone a middle finger, you're sending them Saturn energy. So if you're practicing magic, if you're doing ceremonial magic, they look at the days of the week as being very significant. So, for example, when you see our days of the week, which are ancient in these ways of looking at it, well, we go back and forth over to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Well, in the French and in other languages, we get more of an idea about that. So from Monday, it's lundi. So lundi, mardi, mercredi, jeudi, vendredi, and onward. So lundi is the lunar day, the day of the moon. So if you look at people traditionally, we say if someone's associated with the moon, they're a lunatic. They're getting lunacy, right? Like they do on a full moon. So if you go over to that Monday, you get that day. So the next day, Tuesday, we look at Mars Day. So if they have an energy about Mars, they would do it with that. So if you wanted to create a spell, let's say, if someone was putting a spell together and they were doing it for good fortune and money and abundance, they would do it on Thursday, because Thursday is Thor's day. It's the day of Jupiter. It's the day of money. It's the day associated with green. So they would do a spell on a Thursday, but they wouldn't just do it on Thursday. They'd even look at the hours in the occult, which means the secret or the hidden clandestine sciences of the ancients. They would look at the hours associated with this, and 8 o'clock is the hour of Jupiter. So think about that. If you're paying attention to the day of the week, the time that's being there for the magical energy, why not the season?
Well, here's the crazy part, folks, to think about it. Right now, as we speak, the October 31st this year falls on a Thursday. How many people are going to be putting enchantments, curses, you name it, as far as Wiccans are concerned, witches are concerned? What do you think they're going to do? Are they going to harm someone or not harm someone? Makes you think.
Well, I'll tell you, we're going to be going really quickly into a Scorpio retrograde and Mercury retrograde that day. So good luck.
We'll see if we can actually make it happen and play catch up with that one. Yeah. So we have some other people in our chat room saying, I think Halloween Eve is one night when no one would notice, when real evil beings are helping Satan and other evil spirits into our current reality.
I don't believe in Satan, Derrick. I think Satan, once people understand what Satan is, so what Satan is a Hebrew word. It means accuser or opposer. It's a misunderstanding of the law of cause and effect, or causality, or what we call karma. When we look at the word devil, yep. Devil is evil with a D in front of it. There are these kind of ideas and opposing forces and ideas in the universe, but really, what is evil? Evil is another form of ignorance. Mm-hmm. And so, am I saying that there are not malevolent entities and beings? Of course there is. We live in a very complex dimensional ecology in our universe, and I think in the future, people are going to discover things that are really out there. For example, you and I have discussed when I was sitting in your living room recently with a plate full of pumpkin pie smothered in whipped cream with your cat coming up next to us for the conversation. I was talking to you about these new breakthroughs that we've had. So, for example, there's a type of a breakthrough that people aren't really aware of quite yet, but they're going to be aware of in the future, where nanoparticles have been injected into people's lungs so they can go underwater without breathing. And there's all kinds of different tests with that. The next test that they are doing that you can look up right now, you can Google this, is that they've taken rats and they've injected nanoparticles into the eyeballs of rats so that rats can see in the dark. And then the next step above that, which they perfected, is to inject nanoparticles into the human eyeball to see outside of the infrared spectrum. And when you go into infrared, you're going to see all kinds of different beings outside of the human light spectrum of intelligences and things that have been observing us. Remember, we have 98% of life when we go, to the atomic, the atomic scale. Going to nanobacteria is, outside of what we're seeing. So we have this entire the entire world at the quantum subspace and beyond. We have these other life forms that are swimming around us, other kinds of entities. So just think about in the near future what we're going to become aware of that might be hiding in our corners or coming out, and maybe Halloween is a time when they can pop by and say hi a little bit easier.
Do you think that nanotechnology is going to be will actually help? I mean, we're a little bit off the base of this part, but this has got my attention. Do you think these nanoparticles will actually help benefit a human? That we can swim underwater longer without having to worry about breathing, and as well as seeing?
Yeah. Well, not only are they going to do that, I mean, we've already been able to do that with the nanotech, but after 2030, Derrick, a lot of people right now, they're really worried about RFID microchips. They're talking about Neuralink from Elon Musk. They're talking about that stuff's already T-model Ford. It's already old news. That some people are going to get it, and it's going to be kind of neat at first, like the old-fashioned 3D pair of glasses that you'd get at the theaters. The next technology that you'll get up from that is what we call transdermal. You'll get like a tattoo that will come into you with technology, but that's already old news anyways. After 2030, people should be prepared because just to give everybody a little preview of what's coming in the future, why we have to start talking about it now, is that the technology that's coming is the nanotech that implants are going to go into your body, and inside of your cell, inside of the cells in your body, you have what they call mitochondria. Inside of the mitochondria, you have something called a goblet. And once you unlock that goblet, the nanotech that's going to basically hijack your cellular system, your nervous system, is not only going to stop aging, but it's going to use the nitrogen and hydrogen from outside of your body to make it so you don't have to eat anymore. It will create your own food and water inside of your body based on the atmosphere around you. But it will also link you with your own unique IP address. Not to get too complicated for everyone, but you have your own energy field through quantum cohesion or superposition, and you have an IP address on the network. You will become part of the quantum network. Why we need to start thinking about this now and talking about this now, and I'm in talks with some very serious people about this that even are close to Elon Musk, for example, is that we need to think about our human sovereignty. Sovereignty is the universal blueprint in the universe. Do we want to become a hive mind, or do we want to utilize these technologies for the highest good because they are a consciousness-based technology? Our technology and spirituality are converging.
Do you think yourself is it worth being having to accept this for all of us, or do you think that we should make a decision on our own? Like having myself, I really would not want to, because to me, my feeling is anytime that any government wants to experiment on you, you're just knowing to be a guinea pig, so to speak, whether it works for you or where it doesn't work for you. Also, too, if you that means you cannot have any freedom of thinking, because they'll know exactly what you're thinking. It's all or know exactly what you agree or disagree. And what if the government said, okay, well, if he doesn't like us, we'll just eliminate that person? It gets to be kind of clicky for me, because we have to remember that, sure, there's so much nanotechnology out there and so much technology that they're trying to make it so advanced that it becomes it's like a horror flick for me, because it'll turn itself into a horror movie, so to speak. They're going to be experimenting on so many people to the point where, anybody wants to volunteer. Yeah, there are people out there that are trying to, they'll say, well, I'll pay you here. I'll put this in your arm. I'll give you some money for that. If those people want to do it to be experimented on, that's fine. But myself personally, I rather have free thinking, free voice, free thought, like how I want to say what I want to say, free movement. Why would I want somebody to find exactly where I am? Because once you get that inserted into your arm or that sort of thing, then they know exactly where you are. And yet they may say, oh, well, what if you get lost and we need to find you? I don't care. And if people want to take that little thing and stick it in their arm and be found, that's fine. If they want to make a big deal about using for kids, parents have forgotten to depend on a child's decision making and knowing that they'd be responsible to get back to their parent to say, Mom, Dad, I'm over here. But if they make a parent feel that every time they turn around the child's not there, they'll get the parent even more freaked out. Does that make any sense?
It makes sense, but here's the thing. We have various layers of how far this surveillance and this technology goes. We have no idea. The regular people have no idea how deep and how far this technology goes and where we're going with it. So, for example, you have a cell phone today. You have the S10 Plus,
yep.
Same phone as me.
Yep.
Great phone. It's incredible phone. The technology is amazing. We know that, let's say, for example, all of your conversations, your messages, all your interactions that you do, even on this platform that you're streaming this on for Facebook, it's all categorized and used to psychologically profile you and put into databases everywhere. But you might say the average citizen doesn't have the ability to look at it. Maybe it's dissected using what they call artificial intelligence or machine learning, and it's put into these different profiles, but there isn't some human looking at it. The average person isn't examining you in some office to look at that, but it's in a very compartmentalized data storage and used in other areas. It's just like, what we might be doing in one area isn't visible to every area. Now, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go? Because I'll tell you something. If you follow me down a little rabbit hole, I'll bring you into this quantum computing rabbit hole that it leads to spirituality, consciousness, and what you're saying, and it is pretty mind-blowing. So today's computers that we're using right now, we think they're so fast, the computer that you're on right now. The computer you're on right now works
slow.
Yeah, I mean, well, if it's running Microsoft Windows 10, chances are that everybody's computer's slow on that and continually updating ad nauseum in perpetuity. Okay, but the computers that we have here, they operate on something called binary, right? So binary operates on ones and zeros. So a 1 is a yes. A 0 is a no. Okay, so ones and zeros, zeros and ones. We examine that through what we call Moore's Law, when we go into something like qubits and we start measuring how our computers work. But how this works is the best way I can describe this to you and how it's been taught to me is that if you, do you know, like you take a scroll, Derrick, like the Torah, or you take those old cylinder seals from the Sumerians?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you roll that scroll out, roll it out in front of you, that's what we call linear. It's in a flat line. That is our current computing, the binary computing. So if you roll that scroll up, roll it up into like a little tight cylinder, though, in front of you, everybody, if you could picture with me, everyone that's on Between Two Worlds radio right now, listening or watching this, picture a circle in front of you, a sphere. Now, in that sphere in front of you, I want you to put a 1 at the top. Put a 1 right here at the top. Put a 0 at the bottom. In the middle of that, we have the nexus to the nexus to null space, or beyond time space. So we have infinite information in the middle of that. On the other side of the cylinder here, on the scroll, I want you to put a 1 over here, a 0 over here, so we have infinite information over here. What I'm essentially telling you in this very deep cylinder that goes all the way back is that we can calculate every single particle in our universe. I'm just talking our universe now. We haven't even gotten into the other universes that we know exist in the multiverse. So picture this. Not only can we calculate every single particle in our universe, Derrick, and I want you to think about this. I want you and all the listeners to think about this. In your body right now, you have 100 trillion cells in your body. There's 100 trillion atoms in a cell and 100 trillion cells in an atom. Okay? And atoms are made of mostly blank spaces. We have 8 billion people on this earth, so that means that if it's all blank spaces, you can fit everybody on this earth at the end of your pinky finger. So if we can calculate every particle in our universe with that vast of computing, we know what little Julius Caesar had for breakfast on the morning of his 8-year-old name day. We know what he was thinking that morning, and we know everything that's going to happen in every direction. Now, what if I was to tell you, Derrick, that there's a large underground facility in Utah where we have a primitive version of that technology right now through quantum computing, and that our visitors up there have an even more advanced version? Now, think about how you would know everything that's happening at all times in simultaneity, and the universe just became your computer. That is what quantum computing is. That's where our technology is going. That's where we are going. And in 10, 15 years from now, people need to start thinking about this, because if we look at it, you're not going to be able to walk through a door without it. You're not going to be able to sustain yourself or get food without it. So we're moving into an area where our technology is becoming spiritual, emerging with consciousness.
Because you basically talk about the circle, you talk about the line, and the line across, you turned itself into a medicine wheel.
Right, just exactly. Look at the medicine wheel.
Yeah, you turn into a medicine wheel. So basically, it all aspects of all the directions, talks about the 4 peoples, 4 directions, and also the 4 elements.
Beautiful.
But it's all based on healing. It's based on your direction, where you're going, your power, as far as your path is concerned. Moore's law. I mean, let's put it this way, and as soon as you start talking about that, and you talk about the 10, 15 years, and then how the mind is going to think for itself even more, I'm wondering if the extraterrestrials, E.T. brothers, from all different parts of the planetary system, I wonder if this is what they've been doing already, and they've been showing us already how to do the nanotechnology.
Oh, exactly. That's exactly
because
they're
not speaking. They're not speaking with their voice, Johnny. They're speaking with their mind.
That's right, Derrick. And basically, what you're essentially seeing is that this is how nature works. This is how this technology works in nature. If you look at a tree outside in your yard, as it was taught to me about this subject from some of my teachers, is that if you look at the tree outside in your yard, why doesn't the tree burn up in the sun with the leaves? How are the leaves able to use not only photosynthesis and everything else like that, but they take the photonic energy and they can transfer it very quickly? Because when you look at a tree, there's actually an amazing life of trees. Now, when we go into the quantum, outside of Moore's law, we go into the quantum, we're operating at very, very fast speeds of transfer of information into femtobits and femtoseconds, extremely dense transfers of incredible information. So in a tree, in the secret life of trees, the tree is doing what they call transbiotic accumulation of things like sugars, carbon, oxygen, and it's taking this and it's able to distribute it out into nanobacteria. And a lot of people don't know this, that underneath a tree, trees in a secret life of them are helping other plants grow 1 kilometer away. A tree will detect if something else is struggling and help it. And speaking of First Nations and indigenous practices, they knew a long time ago the secret life of trees, and that even if you had a headache, you could go sit under a willow tree, where we also get a salicylic acid for making aspirin, but they knew you could just have the energy come away from the tree, or they would take the willow bark, for example, right?
Yeah, your willow bark or your birch bark, you can actually, you could take the powder from the back of the birch bark, you just peel it back into powder, you mix it with some water, and you heat it up, you can make yourself a small little bannock, or for your aspirin. There's many things in the water in the swamps that we use, and there's actually a town called Onion Lake in Alberta, and yet Onion Lake is a swamp, but when you walk in the area, it smells like onions, and that they're just they smell like onions, and what they are, they're actually a weed. They're cattails. So you pull out the cattail, and the root itself actually is edible, and you eat that. You can cook that and eat that, or eat raw, and then everything that's usable, everything that's even in the leaf itself, is used for use to braid into a rope. Nothing's wasted. All the puffing part of it, the top of it, is a filler to put in and make your own little cushions and pillows. The more you collect it, that's what they used to use. Nothing was ever wasted. Now, I also want to acknowledge also 107.7 in New Orleans. Thank you for joining us. Also, they are the ones that are our major support to help keep UPRN Radio Network going. And also Between Two Worlds Radio. And thank you guys for welcoming us here and to be part of this. Because why I'm bringing up New Orleans is because there's something else that relates to haunting in New Orleans. There are a lot of hauntings in New Orleans, and that is part of the voodooism and hoodooism. And people talk about that during Halloween. So, Johnny, what do you think that would, how that relate to them celebrating Halloween there?
Well, yeah, there's lots of magical traditions, most certainly with voodoo, hoodoo, and various beliefs. I mean, again, there's these other traditions that we get out of the West Indies, and we bring in an infusion also of Catholicism, saints, biblical ideas. And even with those practices, when we bring into calling on spirits and energies, they go back into the biblical ideas of the Witch of Endor, who was one of the first recorded mediums that we get. And, bringing all these traditions back to their origins, even the Witch of Endor, it's really interesting that we get these from the Sumerian. And from the Sumerian, we go look in what they call the Book of Enoch, which is one of the apocryphal or deleted books of the Bible that's actually mentioned in the Bible. And in the Book of Enoch, actually in the area called the Book of Watchers inside of the Book of Enoch, it talks about how these fallen ones, who some have said were the extraterrestrials, the fallen angels, that came to Earth, that taught women who they laid with, and they thought the women looked really good, and they said, hey, they look pretty good. And so they said they laid with them and laid with the daughters of men, and they produced an offspring of giants. Well, when they went with them, they taught them sorcery, they taught them mediumship, they taught them working with herbs, they taught them all these kinds of magical, or what we would call psychic abilities, or taught them how to use it because they inherited some of that. So it's interesting that a lot of these traditions go way back, and we've been talking about them on this earth for a very long time.
Who do you think? I got one for you here, and another friend of our chat room said, where does witchcraft come in on Halloween? Where did this begin?
Well, again, Halloween is based on a pagan holiday. Halloween comes back from Samhain or Samhain. These were traditions by the pagan people, the Pagani, that would want to honor the seasons, the energies, open up the portals, give thanks to the earth, and draw out the energies that would come out. And again, we bring it out into the Western world through different migrations of people. Like I was saying at the beginning of the show, we started to change its holiday origins around the 1800s. And it started to become more of a festive holiday celebration that was fun, about dressing up and all those things. And became an American classic in the 1920s and the 1950s. And, you know, of course, it's given us so many movies, and Michael Jackson's Thriller, the Monster Mash, all the traditions that have come today in haunted houses, but it all comes back from old stuff. I'll tell you, when I'm in Ireland, when I travel out in Europe, so not everywhere in Europe, you know, follows the ideas of Halloween. It's not really big in Eastern Europe, you know, in places like Hungary and Romania and those sorts of areas. But most certainly in Ireland, there's a different view of Halloween today. It's more of a simple, traditional, spiritual perspective. They're influenced a little by the American tradition, though.
Do you think the Canadian version and the American version of Halloween is different from each other, or do you think they're pretty well close?
The Canadian and the American are very similar, except in Canada we do things a little bit better. We have firecrackers and fireworks.
Now we got another person, Ron, who actually in the chat room says, does trick-or-treating and candy have an esoteric meaning?
Yes, it does. I mean, first of all, the idea of getting these treats comes really back from the idea of the All Souls cakes, and you would leave offerings out for the spirits and leave treats and give it to people. And then, of course, when it became more of a kids' holiday and more, you know, of a festive thing, it turned into candy and everything. Halloween is a $6 billion industry in America every year.
One of my favorites, actually, for Halloween candy was the, I guess I'd say that brown tacky, like a toffee. It was that was a toffee.
Oh, okay.
That was a Halloween toffee candy, and it had that orange and black.
Did it have the cats on it? The little brown and orange ones that was wrapped up in?
I think so. Yeah, those are the ones that and it tastes like really. It was nice.
It was good.
You're eating those all the time as a kid, you know, like and then you get really upset. You're going through all your candies after you're going through doing your house to house trick or treating. And then you're sorting through your stuff, and then my parents used to separate all my candies up and stuff. But meantime, I would eat more of those toffee candies than anything else on top of that. And then we would, for some reason, I don't know why, those other leftover candies at Halloween would be used for family gatherings at Christmas. So you didn't have to spend money. That just moved to the next season for a celebration.
Yeah, no, you know, when you were trick-or-treating as a kid, you'd always remember the one house that gave you the big chocolate bars. You'd go there and you get the Coffee Crisp or the Snickers or O. Henry or whatever the one is. And I know for the American listeners, they have different chocolate bars over there. They don't always have the same ones, but it seemed like the tradition was to play the trick on the house that didn't have the good stuff. There's always those guys handing out, you know, popcorn or literature or vegetables. Those are always popular houses, right?
Yeah. Have you ever been to a haunted house during Halloween? Have you ever experienced one of those yourself?
Yeah, no, I've been to lots of haunted houses. I'll tell you the one that we have out in Vancouver here. There's the Fright Night at Playland. The only thing I don't like about that haunted house, I went there a few years ago, and they had it for a while there that there was real actors that were like part-time UBC students that were working there, and they would grab people and they would hold on to them and until one guy was beat up severely for doing that to the wrong guy when he was on a date or something. And so I don't know if they do that anymore, but that was a really freaky one where you'd walk through it. And but that one was really not so much fun. It was like a highly demonic kind of one that was there in the middle of the city.
So probably that to make it look like it's demonic, or in that way that the people like to get scared. I don't know why. I mean, we have all these Halloween trains going on right now. We got them right now for here in Vancouver at Stanley Park. They got the Halloween miniature train going, and folks can go down there. You pay $5 to go in there, and you get experience the whole. The Halloween experience, and the actors will play the role while you're sitting on the train, and they'll do the history of Halloween. Or one year they did all the horror movies, the old horror movies, which was Wolfman, Dracula, Frankenstein, you name it, the Mummy, and there were actors, and from a distance, and the lights are on them, and it looks like it's actually they were just working on them, experimenting on them, or discovering them, and we get to experience almost like it's not 3D, it looked real. It's kind of funny how it worked out, but
Did you ever go to there a few years ago at Stanley Park? They had the Halloween train that was in the theme of extraterrestrials. They had the Fire in the Sky theme, and they had all the different UFO scenes.
no, I missed that one. But you can actually, I bet you can go online on YouTube, and I'm sure it'll be there.
Yeah, no, it was awesome. It was one of the best scenes they had ever done there. They had UFOs coming down, giant ET scenes where they're dissecting people on the tables with the grays and stuff, and it was really well done with the X-Files music. One of the best things I'd ever seen come out of that train setup, because sometimes the train is hit or miss. I always go to the Christmas train. I always hit that one up, and I appreciate you reminding me on that. My favorite haunted house is in Disneyland. In Disneyland, they have a haunted house that is really haunted there, because what's happened is when the house was built, it was built like an old New Orleans sort of mansion. And it's got all kinds of different happy haunts in there. And it's very specifically, people have actually died by getting up off the ride. They were falling off of a very steep place. So people have died on the attraction. But people also, all the time, they come to Disneyland with their ashes, and they go spread the ashes on that ride, the haunted mansion. Disneyland actually has quite a few ghosts that are believed to have been around there. In fact, there's a ghost even on the Pirates of the Caribbean over in Disney World, where a beam had hit his head, named George, and they say if they don't come in there, the workers say they don't come in there every day and say, "Good morning, George," that the ride goes haywire and stops working.
And it's always the people are dumping off their ashes, their loved ones, maybe because their loved ones loved being in Walt Disney at the time when they were alive, but yet, yeah, that's called familiar or unfamiliar.
Derrick, do you know what they said to me? The staff at the Haunted Mansion ride in Disneyland, they said, because I go, whenever I'm in California, I always go to Disneyland. They say they keep, those dust busters, like a HEPA filter cleanup?
Yep.
They say it happens so often, they have to keep dust busters, the HEPA filter things, to go in there, like probably on the hour, and get up people's ashes from dumping it on the ride.
They're sucking up a lot of ghosts, eh? Those are Ghostbusters.
Yeah, Ghostbusters.
Those are ghost dusters.
That's right.
Those are ghost dusters. Yeah,
ghost dusters.
Speaking of ghostly and Halloween a little bit, Walt Disney. Let's talk about Walt Disney, because
Sure.
there's been rumors that he has haunted his own Disney World or Disneyland.
Yep.
It's been known that others are connected to it, but yet you once said, or the rumor was that, or maybe it isn't, I'm not sure, when someone talked about it actually has a connection to the Masons. How does that come about?
It does. The original Disneyland definitely has a Masonic connection. I was just talking about that with my friend Hank Kracher. He is probably listening to the show right now. And he and I made a video recently about Walt Disney's connection to Masonry. Walt Disney was brought up in something called demalaise, which is sort of like Masonry for young people. And he was a hard worker. He went through a lot of hardship. A lot of people out there, I get it, in the conspiracy world, they want to link like a darker conspiracy to Disneyland, and they want to say that there's all these dark things in the world. I get it. Maybe there are dark things in the world, but what I can tell you about Disney is that he was a beautiful man with a great imagination, and he went through a lot of trials and tribulations to get that idea of Mickey Mouse out there and to get to where he was. But in Disneyland, when you look at it, there's something there called Club 33. And Club 33 is right under what they call the Pirates of the Caribbean, or right above it, actually. It's right beside it. For those people who might be listening, if you've ever been into that New Orleans Square, since we're broadcasting here from New Orleans with the radio station, a lot of people will appreciate that. When you go into the Pirates of the Caribbean, you're going through something called the Blue Bayou Restaurant, these little windows looking down at you from a very special club that's very, very elite. Of course, the number 33 is associated with the 33rd degree of Scottish Rite Freemason. Freemasonry. The club itself was brought there after Walt Disney had passed. That was originally put there to pay tribute to 33rd degree Masons, as Walt had a tremendous respect for Masonry. But as you go around Disneyland, there's a lot of secrets there. For example, that we know that Disneyland was built on the 33rd parallel. It was built just like, these great places of power on the earth. It's like Glastonbury Tor, the Great Pyramid. There's a great lot of energy. And actually, where the castle is, Derrick, when you walk through the doors of Disneyland, when Walt opened the doors of Disneyland on July 17th, 1955, he made it so as soon as you come through Main Street, USA, you open up into this castle. Now, the castle is in the influx of where the 33rd parallel meets, and right behind that castle, there is a carousel. The carousel in Fantasyland is a Tesla coil. And the Disneyland, when it was put together, it was consulted by and built up by two guys from SRI, the remote viewing guys. Remember, like... Dr. Hell put off Ingo Swann, Uri Geller, all them. Well, these guys put that carousel there to spin out the energy into the park, so you felt really good. But there's all kinds of little Masonic clues and ideas and symbols that were left behind by Disney in the park itself. That tradition doesn't necessarily hold today, because Disneyland is under a different direction today, a different management, of course, but the family still has some say in the background, but the original design and purpose of it had a greater ideal.
Yeah, 'cause it sounds to me that I think I remember Walt's brother, Roy. He was pretty upset the fact that he was shoved aside, not by Walt, because Walt passed away then, but he was shoved aside by the people that were running the Disneyland. He was quite upset the fact that he was never given any say in the matter, unless they asked for an opinion, but never had any say, and that really bothered him a lot. Have you heard about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, Disneyland as a company, and Walt Disney's company, when it was taken over by different folks that came in. There's different changes over in Burbank with Walt Disney Studios. The company had different directions that it went at different times with Michael Eisner and various people that took over. But if you look at the overall purpose of what Disneyland was supposed to do, and I get it, a lot of people aren't happy with how our media or Hollywood or movies have gone, because there's certain animators that will come in and they might have an agenda or they might do something. But the overall purpose of Disneyland was supposed to inspire the imaginations of people. It was supposed to bring out the magic of fairy tales. It was supposed to bring these fairy tales and make them come alive to help people to feel a place of joy in the world and a place of healing. And I really think it has done that. If you look at what these sort of things have reminded us of, we look around and just look today, Derrick. You and I look at the news, and the news can be such a dark and miserable place sometimes, with all kinds of terrible things going on in the world. We need a little bit of a reminder that there's magic in the world still.
Well, Dolores actually, she's in the chat room. She's saying that Disney World has went down. She says too many people, and they're always fights, physical fights. Hours to wait to ride, and I've been there at least 20 times, she says, and she lived in Florida, and says she will never go back. So that could be really crazy. Now we've got
it is, but I mean, again, Disney World is a place that we got to remember. Disney World isn't just like Disney World has the Magic Kingdom, which is like Disneyland in Anaheim, California. And by the way, Anaheim, California, the Disneyland there has a Masonic clue in it. It's the address is 1313 South Harbor Boulevard, and that's a Masonic cipher. 13 is the letter M, so it's like Master Mason, 1313, but it's also Mickey Mouse, MM. So Walt Disney was peppering clues all the way through, even Mickey Mouse wearing the Masonic gloves that he has in the black and white. But over in Disney World...
Mickey Mouse is a Freemason.
Yeah, of course he is. So you go over...
Well, yeah, that makes sense, because he actually was a wizard. Practicing
That's
wizard.
it. Look at him in
Phantasma.
Look, if you look over in Disney World, though, Disney World, where she's talking about by Celebration, Florida, and everything else like that, they going into that area, there's all kinds of different parks and areas that you go into that it's split up into. So when we look into Disney World, it is sort of this worldwide attraction that people all over the world come from there. But population is growing everywhere, and these sorts of dilemmas are happening even where we live. I mean, look, there's certain areas where we live, even here in Canada now, due to the density of population, globalization, and changes where there's fights happening that never used to be there. So you can't get away from it. All we can do is kind of move through this particular time period of growing pains.
I think everybody's into that impatience now. Everybody's hurry up, go, hurry up, go. And because I think it's all to do with the cell phones at the time now. It's everybody hurry up. Nobody's actually writing a letter to each other. It's more like an email, and then one answer back now. So it's no longer that. Well, I'm waiting in bated breath. To find out what's going to happen next.
Age of Aquarius. It's the age of Aquarius we're moving into.
Age of Aquarius started back in the '60s too.
That's it. The song, right?
Yeah.
But we're shifting into this age of Aquarius now, and the Aquarian time is now, and that's going to shift. You see, in the Bible, if you look at all the old religions, even if back into Mithraism and all these sort of things, we see symbolism. Mithra, when he came about, which was the Roman religion before Christianity came out, Mithra was ripping the head off of a bull. And that's the age of Taurus that was ending. The age of Taurus was the Hindu reign. That's why we say don't have a cow or holy cow or Oxford University. All those things come from there. Moses was destroying the golden calf. He came out, after that was the age of Aries. He was blowing a shofar horn. In astrology, we have something called the Great Year of the Yugas that we shift through. And every few thousand years, we're shifting. 2,150, 2,160 years, we're shifting through these particular ages. So we've been in the age of Pisces. The age of Pisces was symbolized by Jesus. Jesus was multiplying 2 fish. He encountered 2 fishermen. But in Luke 22:10 of the Christian Bible, what we see, Derrick, the apostles say to Jesus, they say, Master, where are you going to be at the Last Supper? And Jesus tells them, he says, meet me at the house. The house is an astrological term. Meet me at the house with the man with the water pitcher. Well, we are now entering this age of Aquarius. Aquarius is the man with the water pitcher bringing the waters of spring. So we can say now that the Aquarian Messiah, whoever that is, the Aquarian age is upon us. That is a shifting of our energy, like the return of Maitreya Buddha, where we're going to see a transformation in our consciousness.
In the tarot deck, there actually is a man pouring the water, or
the star card.
Yeah, the woman pouring the water. So yeah, it's and to me, when I read that talks about abundance and many things, good things are going to happen for you.
That's right.
I want to go.
I think it's going to be good.
Yeah, I want. They remember the time they said when they were singing the song "The Age of Aquarius," and some of you may not know the song, folks, but in my age time period,
Raquel Welch.
But there's actually it was actually a group of people. There were African American husband and wife team, and they were singing the song "The Age of Aquarius." So, and it was and everybody kept being excited, looking forward to the Age of Aquarius. They had no idea what it meant, but the song became a hit.
But here's something to think about, Derrick. Here's something to think about. I want everyone to think about this, and everybody can call me that occult esoteric guy today, but. If our religions were getting together on this planet to unify their religions, if Jesus was symbolized with 2 fish and 2 fishermen, if we had an Aquarian Messiah coming back, would he not be from the stars? Would he not be fixing our water problems on Earth, like the Flint water crisis, and fixing the water supply on Earth as the water bearer? Would he not bring about maybe go through the same things as an annunciation, maybe have a death and a resurrection? We can now inject people full of peptides and things to bring them back from the dead and use technology. So we might just see our Aquarian Messiah one day during this age and roll out a brand new religion, or see a brand new religion rolled out, let's say, by the Vatican or something. You never know what we could see during the Aquarian age.
I want to talk about I mean, now people actually did say. I mean, some of our chat room people are actually saying a lot of the religions will never unite. There's always competition. But I want to get into something else too that I find is interesting for Halloween, and that's two things. One, fairies.
Yes. Yes, let's talk about fairies. But first of all, let's go back to that comment you said right away about how the person in the chat said religions will never unite.
Yeah.
Religions don't really unite. What happens is that it's like going to the secondhand store and you pick out the stuff that you like and you put it into a new house.
Yeah.
So what you do is you build a new house. For example, we go back to Egypt where a lot of our traditions come from. You say the word sacred because it comes from Saqqara in Egypt. When you had the traditions of the Aten, that was brought into the age of the Amun. The priests of Amun-Ra. Amun is why everybody says Amen at the end of the three Abrahamic religions prayers. So if you're out there saying Amen at the end of your prayer, you go to church and you're saying Amen, that comes from Amun-Ra. Amun meant to be kept in darkness, to keep something secret. So that's what you're saying at the end of each prayer. So we see this just like Christianity borrowed from Mithraism, Dionysus. It borrowed from Horus. It borrowed from everyone else. And they kind of just keep rolling out new ones over and over again in the traditions of the mystery schools. Not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing. But over, again, to fairies. I love talking about this subject, and I'm glad you brought it up because it does relate to Halloween. With the troop and fairies, you yourself have seen fairies. You've seen what you call the brownie, which I thought was a fascinating story. With this...
And that's not a girl in an outfit, by the way, folks.
They're selling you chocolates and cookies. We have a very ancient tradition of fairies that go back not only to the British Isles, we go back into Ireland and Wales, the story of Llewellyn and Rhys and others who have been drawn into fairy circles. You had guys like Paracelsus, the Swiss-German-born toxicologist and occultist. His real name was Philippus Areolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Heinem. That's why we call him Paracelsus for short. He said that there was these fairy kingdoms, these nature kingdoms, and they were divided up with the sylphs, those of the air, the salamanders, those of the fire, the undines and the mermaids, those of the people of the water, and the gnomes and the dwarves and others in the earth kingdom. And he said that there were those sorts of folks. But then if you go to Ireland, we bring about these types of fairy folk that they believe gather in these mounds and come out at various times and places, and they exist in these dimensional thresholds between veils, and many people have had them play tricks on them. They've come in. I very much believe in fairies. I think they're very real. I've made sort of video documentaries of them going into Ireland, talking about the fairy faith in Ireland. I found folks that have had little encounters with them and whatnot. I think it's an incredible thing, but can you tell us your experiences with fairies, Derrick?
Well, mine, I would say two types. One is my daughter's story. Hers was, one of her best friends actually lives on the island, on Vancouver Island, and they found this little, I'd say about a foot tall little person laying on the ground on its side, and she thought it was a cat wearing clothing, and so she picked it up, and it actually talked to her, and she was quite shocked and surprised, but she took it home, took care of it, and fed it, and it became close to her, and he decided to stay with her. And he wasn't transparent. He was actually a real little person, and he stood about a foot tall. He came in from Scotland off the ship, so apparently he was on the ship to go look for some food, and apparently when the ship took off too soon, and he actually was stuck there, so he starved in a very dramatic way, because they were on the waters for quite a long time, at least a month. And so by the time he got to shore, he was pretty happy. But when he got here, and then she took him home, and she fed him and took care of him, and then he chose to stay with her. So, but he has a very hairy face, almost has a cat-featured face, but it's almost part human, part cat. And my daughter had an opportunity to see him.
Amazing.
She just said, she just says, her friend told her, she says, I want to show you something. She said, but don't get scared. And so when she did see it, my daughter's like, wow, that's cool, But most people would turn around and say, oh my God, kill it, So, or they'll say the little people don't exist. Well, yes, they do, folks. My experience is when I was a kid. It was in my grandmother's house, and it wasn't a dream. I was fully awake. I was laying on my grandmother's couch in the living room, and you see the street lights, glowing through the front window, and I can hear people talking, little voices talking in the attic of my grandmother's house. And then as I'm hearing them running back and forth, and they're talking to each other, not rats, not mice. It was actually literally conversations. And then one kept saying, "Shh, quiet, quiet, quiet." And then I can hear the light bulb in the ceiling. I was watching it up above. The light bulb in my grandmother's house was unscrewing itself. And there was a little tiny hand that held onto it, holding it outward sideways. And then his little head peered right through and looked down, and he looked around and he saw me, and he didn't realize I was wide awake. And I looked at him and I went, "Oh, hi." And all of a sudden, like he's in shock, popped his head back in, screwed the light bulb back into the ceiling. That was dimensional. That basically tells me that these little guys can go from dimension to dimension. And I was fortunate to see him, and I never forget that day. So, and then my other time when I did see them is when I was walking my Doberman, and we're going into the forest, and the sky lit up red, absolutely freaking red, and it was just like telling me not to walk down the path, and I'm going like, why is the sky so red? But the energy was so scary. I could feel it. The energy just like it was shooting through me, telling me don't go there. So I decided not to walk into the bush. And within the hour, a tree fell. There was lightning. Apparently, lightning storm started, and it hit the tree, and the tree fell on the very same exact path that I was going to walk. So if I ever decided to go down that path, I never would have made it, or someone would have got hurt, either my dog or myself. So they were warning me ahead of time not to. But when I did go down the path, I saw 3 little people standing on top of the tree, and apparently they were living in that forest. So whatever, they were trying to get me to move that trunk out of the way so they can have a clear path. And so I moved the trunk out of the way after, and it was fine after. So and I wasn't crazy. My dog was, there was 2 little people that rode on my dog's back in the forest. And they stood about,
that's incredible.
Stood about a foot tall, yeah. The little brown.
And I've heard that story. I've heard stories like that a lot from the people I've talked to. I was amazed that when I went into Ireland, when I first flew in there. And by the way, if anyone wants to come out and learn about the fairy lore of Ireland, megalithic fairy lore and magic, Brian Forrester and I, who at the end of this next week, we're going to Peru and Bolivia to take a group there with looking at elongated skulls and the history over in these parts, Machu Picchu, Lake Titicaca, and everything else. But next year, we're going to Ireland in September. We have a new tour that's going to be available at hiddenincas.tours.com. We have teamed up with Authentic Ireland to put this out. It's going to be just amazing. Castles, megalithic circles, fairies, and more. All the stuff we're talking about right now here, Derrick. But it's interesting that when I've gone over there, I've met with folks like Sean Ryan over at Leap Castle, 700-year-old haunted castle. I sat down with him, and he played a flute for me with a song. You can see it online. He and I sitting down with it, a song that was taught to him by the king of the fairies. And he told me, he took me off camera and he says, "Come here, I want to show you something." And he took me around the back of this giant castle that he lives in all by himself in the middle of nowhere with a little fireplace going, with the water coming down outside, the rain and the beautiful Irish weather and the greenery. It's so lush. Took me outside and he said, "You see beyond those trees in that little area," he said, "we go out into there, and there is the entrance to the fairy world by the fairy mounds where we don't disturb them." Some of the folks have had to divert traffic due to fairy mounds and the disturbances that are out there, and they do take it very serious there on the Emerald Isle.
Oh yeah, they do take it serious. And there are some certain groups of little people that don't like us. They prefer, we have to respect their space, and then there are certain other little people that like us. They want to get to know us, but yet It used to be, apparently they said about 1,000 years ago, humankind used to get along with the fairies, and we were always in communication with them, and the children loved playing with them. But apparently it took some very jealous people in the village that changed it all up and figured that, well, okay, they were bigger than them and they can do whatever they want, and they were trying to take the crops or the pieces of the land away from them. And so they tried to chase them out of the area, and that's where they became enemies after some parts of the area, including Ireland as well as Scotland.
Yes. Well, there's been famous books written about fairies, not only by Yeats. There was Reverend Kirk, who wrote this, In Search of the Fairy Faith, and he was a Scottish reverend. So there's been all kinds of different traditions and people just fascinated with this subject. The fairies have been mentioned a long ways back, all the way back into the ancient world. They were talking about them and opening up doorways to talk to them and then playing tricks on them and everything else.
Ron in the chat room says, I sometimes wonder if children are able to see fairies and other parts of the light spectrum that become invisible as we age and are conditioned or programmed.
Yeah, no, it's not just that, though. It's also your pineal gland. So your pineal gland, there's certain secret societies that have traditions. In the traditions where they would make you wear a blindfold or darken your vision. And then what they would do after a number of days or even a 24-hour period or even less, they would take the blindfold off when the sun was rising up so that the sun would come in through your optic nerve to the rods and cones in your eyes and travel up the visual cortices and actually open up your pineal gland. A lot of people don't realize that how calcified your pineal gland has become. And your pineal gland, where you create your DMT, or dimethyltryptamine, which you're being flooded with at night when you're dreaming or when you're sleeping. It's also being created in your lungs. A lot of these areas that it's in charge of with serotonin and melatonin, as well as the pituitary gland. A lot of these get destroyed with our diet, our food, our habits, and everything as adults. So children sometimes have a genetic capability that it's unlocked, or adults that work with it. But for example, Derrick, you're always using these areas. You're opening this up and you're running it like an instrument, like working out.
All the time. Now, Ron again asked another question. Pineal calcified? ?
Tell him to go on to Google and type in calcified pineal gland. And why do you think people are getting loads of sodium fluoride dumped in your water? I mean, sodium fluoride also would calcify over the pineal gland. There's so many other things that we do in our diets and whatnot that we can change. But there are things that you can do to open up your eyes. I mean, if you look up any exercises on auras, making your eyes blurry and then bringing them back again and doing exercises, and it's stimulating the rods and cones in your eyes. The Chinese have, there's a couple pressure points that they have for seeing spirits. So they have this thing right behind at the back of your head, directly at the back of your head. If you massage that, there's something also with the Hu Yin point. They call it an acupressure. You can read about that in the book by Ted Andrews called The Intercession of Spirits. And, of course, Derrick Whiteskycloud here, you guys, you know that this man has been teaching how to see spirits for forever and giving performances and going before live audiences and wowing them. So if you want to see spirits, you need to contact this man.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about you before we finish off the night. Where can the folks find you? And are you going out for Halloween?
You cut off at that one part right before Halloween. What was that you said?
Where can our listeners find you? And also, are you going out for Halloween this year?
Well, thank you for asking. I'm going to go for Halloween as I was thinking of either going as myself or if that's not scary enough, I don't know. I might dress up as a politician because the politicians are dressing up as everybody else. So I might as well dress up as them. That might also be too scary. As for how to find me, you can find me on my website, www.metaphysicalsource.com. On Instagram, I'm Esoteric Johnny. On Twitter, Jonny Enoch. Facebook, Jonny Enoch. Find me on my YouTube channel, Metaphysical Source. And, of course, we have some great tours coming up to Egypt and Peru and Ireland and other places. You can find out about those over at www.ancientmysterytours.com. But of course, Derrick, I also have to mention that you are going to be with us next year at an incredible conference. Out of the conferences I'm going next year, the one that is going to be really super exciting because you're there, and so is Jordan Maxwell, is going to be the UFO Mega Conference. That's the Laughlin UFO Megaconference.com.
Laughlin, Nevada.
Everybody should check this out. 30 incredible international speakers, some amazing surprises, awesome stuff. Also, other great conferences I'll be at next year that I'll meet everybody at. I'll also be at the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles, presenting on NDEs and the afterlife. My friend Daniel Brinkley's going to be there with me, and so much more. Also, I'll be at Contact in the Desert next year, Alien Snowfest, and some other conferences we're still in negotiation with for next year. But it's going to be an awesome year, and I'm so excited, Derrick, that you're coming out to Laughlin, Nevada.
Yeah, and I'm not just going to be there I'm not going to be just there watching it, folks. I'm actually on the stage telling my story, so it's going to be interesting. Anyways, thank you folks for joining me. I want to thank you, Johnny, and also, folks, we're going to call this a night. Thank you for joining us on Between Two Worlds Radio, and it's a lot different.
Wait, Derrick.
Yep.
Let me thank you too. Let me thank you, Derrick. Thank you so much for having me back on your show, and thank you to all the Between Two Worlds listeners. And I want to wish everybody a very happy Halloween and a great night.
Castle lights are growing dim. There's no one left but me and him. When next we meet in Frankenstone, don't come alone.
We're done. Thank you,
Awesome.
folks. Take care.